My name is Jason Miller, and this all started in my small third-floor apartment in downtown Chicago, where I live alone, or at least I thought I did. I noticed it because my keys weren't where I left them. I always dropped them in the same spot on the kitchen table, hard enough to make that cheap wood thud. Then I head straight for the sink. That night, the thud never came. The table looked arranged. My keys sat off to the side, lined up parallel with the edge like someone had measured it, and in the center was a paper swan. The overhead light hummed, flickering just enough to make the shadows twitch. I stood there with my hand still wrapped around the strap of my work bag, staring at it, trying to remember if I'd bought something wrapped in paper, if a receipt could have turned into this. But it wasn't receipt paper. It was thick, smooth, bright white. The folds were razor sharp. Whoever made it had taken their time. My stomach started doing that slow sinking drop, like missing a step in the dark. I lived alone. No spare keys out there, no recent guests, nobody who'd stop by as a joke. The front door was still locked, chain hanging, windows shut tight. The air had that stale, closed-up smell I'd left in the morning. Nothing else was out of place, just the swan sitting there like it had been waiting all day for me to come home and notice. I told myself to touch it, because not touching it felt worse. The paper was cool, colder than the room, like it had been kept somewhere without heat. When I lifted it, something underneath dragged across the table with a faint scratch, and I realized my keys hadn't been moved gently. They'd been pushed aside, forced to make space. I turned the swan over expecting tape, glue, something, but there was nothing holding it together except perfect patience. I even checked the trash, half hoping I'd find scraps from practice folds, proof that someone had been sloppy before getting it right. The bag was exactly how I'd left it that morning, coffee grounds on top, tied shut. I walked the apartment after that, slow, opening doors too fast, like I wanted to catch someone mid-breath. Closet, shower curtain, behind the couch, under the bed, empty. Still, the feeling didn't leave. It settled in behind my ribs, heavy, alive, as if the room had inhaled with me and forgotten to breathe out. I went back to the kitchen, and the table looked bigger now, like a stage with a spotlight. I should have thrown the swan away. Instead, I kept staring at it, noticing how its head angled toward the hallway to my bedroom, like it knew where I slept. That was when I understood something I couldn't explain yet. This wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't random. Whoever had done it believed they'd be back tonight, and somehow they were sure I would be too. I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the blankets with the bedroom light on, staring at the doorway, telling myself I was being dramatic while every tiny sound in the building crawled across my nerves. Pipes knocked. Someone upstairs flushed a toilet. A car passed outside with bass thudding through the glass. Normal stuff. Still, my eyes kept drifting to the hall like something might lean around the corner if I blinked too long. I must have drifted off near morning because the next thing I remember was my alarm screaming and sunlight cutting across my face. For a second, I felt stupidly relieved. Nothing had happened. No footsteps, no voices, no stranger standing over me. I even laughed at myself while I walked toward the kitchen, already rehearsing how I'd tell the story later and make it sound funny instead of pathetic. Then I saw the table, and the laugh dried up in my throat so fast it hurt. The swan was gone. In its place were 4 new figures, lined in a row, each one facing the hallway: a dog, a deer, a tall, thin bird, and something shaped wrong, like a person bent too far backward. My chair had been moved to the wall. The table was cleared like a work surface. They hadn't just come back. They'd stayed. I backed up until my shoulder blades hit the fridge. I tried to think, to build a timeline, to remember waking up even once in the night. Nothing. My phone said I'd slept 6 hours straight. The locks were still thrown, chains still hanging. No footprints, no muddy prints, nothing broken. I stepped closer, moving slow, like they might scatter if I surprised them. The paper wasn't plain anymore. I could see faint marks pressed into the folds, little gray smudges where fingers had held tight. Real hands, real pressure. Whoever did this had been right here, leaning where I was leaning, breathing my air. The bent figure pulled my attention back every time I tried to look away. Its spine arched so far, the head almost touched the heels, like it had been forced there, like something had kept pushing until it couldn't bend anymore. My stomach rolled. I reached out before I could talk myself out of it, thinking maybe I'd find tape or thread or some trick. The moment my fingers brushed, I felt a lump hidden inside the paper. Something extra, tucked deep, not part of the shape. My pulse started hammering. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew whoever had done this didn't want me to. But standing there with that weight under the fold felt worse than fear. It felt like being invited. And without letting myself think any further, I started to pull it apart. The paper tore easier than I expected. The legs came apart first. Then the long curve of the back collapsed in on itself, flattening with a soft, dry whisper. Something slid free and tapped the table. I flinched so hard I almost fell. It wasn't another note. It was a tiny rectangle of glossy plastic, like part of a key card, shaved thin enough to hide in the layers. No writing, just a black magnetic strip across the back, and a thumbprint pressed into the front in a gray, greasy smear. My breath fogged it when I leaned close. I had the sudden, horrible understanding that the print wasn't decoration. It was a guide, someone showing me exactly where a finger should go. The rest of the apartment felt farther away than it should have, like the walls had pulled back to watch. I kept expecting to hear a footstep, or the scrape of someone shifting their weight in the hallway, patient, waiting to see what I would do next. I didn't want to play along, but I already was. I grabbed my phone and ordered a security camera with same-day pickup. If someone could get in, I wanted proof. If something else could, I needed it even more. I left the figures where they were, half ruined, half standing, like evidence from a crime scene, and I walked out without turning my back on them until the doorframe forced me to. I set the camera up that evening with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, aimed straight at the living room and the strip of darkness leading to my bedroom. The app walked me through it in that cheerful voice companies use, like I was installing a toy instead of bait. I made sure alerts were loud, extra loud. Then I waited. Hours dragged by with nothing but the normal life of the building seeping through the walls. TV laughter, running water, someone arguing in the parking lot. I almost convinced myself the whole thing had been a warning scare, a sick joke that would end now that I'd pushed back. Around midnight, my eyes burned so bad I let them close. Just for a second, the alert exploded in my hand. Motion detected. Living room. I opened the feed, expecting to catch a person, a mask, anything human I could fight or call the cops about. The camera showed the coffee table, empty except for the flattened paper I'd left behind. Then the image warped, like heat rising off asphalt, and something tall began to gather itself out of the distortion in the hallway, not walking in, forming there, length after length stacking upward, joints finding each other, skin, or something like it, tightening over angles too sharp to belong to a body. It didn't hurry. It knew I could see it. And slowly, like it had all the time in the world, it bent forward toward the lens, bringing where a face should be closer, closer, until the screen went black and my apartment went silent enough that I could hear my own voice whisper, "It's here." I don't remember deciding to go back inside, but suddenly I was at the door, keys in my shaking hand, staring at my own reflection in the peephole like it belonged to somebody else. The hallway behind me was quiet, neighbors asleep, elevators resting on other floors. Normal building, normal night. My phone still showed the dead camera screen. No new alerts, no sound from inside. I told myself if something had been there, it would have come out already. It would have chased me. It would have done something loud and obvious. Instead, the lock turned smooth as ever, like nothing had changed, and the apartment greeted me with that same stale air I'd left earlier. The table sat in the middle of the room under the light. Flat paper everywhere, ripped open, harmless. I took one step in and the bulb above me popped with a tiny snap. Glass dust sprinkling down, plunging half the place into shadow. From somewhere deeper inside came a slow, dragging noise, soft but steady, like paper being pulled across carpet. My chest tightened. It wasn't rushing me. It was working. The shapes were back on the table. Not the animals. These were smaller, tighter, twisted into poses that made my joints ache just looking at them. Arms folded the wrong way. Heads tucked in like they were hiding their faces. There were more than before, arranged in a circle, all aimed toward one empty spot at the edge, a space the size of my two hands, waiting to be filled. I didn't want to understand, but understanding kept happening anyway. I grabbed one, meaning to throw it, crush it, anything, but it felt warm, almost damp, like it had been held a moment ago. The paper gave under my grip and opened in jerks. Inside were layers and layers, thinner each time, until the center revealed something dark and stiff that cracked when it met the air. Hair, short, coarse strands pressed flat. I dropped it and stumbled back, heart punching against my ribs, and that dragging sound grew louder behind me, closer now, accompanied by a careful tapping, as if long fingers were testing the walls to learn their shape. I looked at the empty place in the circle and knew with absolute clarity it wasn't for tonight. It was for when I finally did what it wanted, when I looked at it and let it finish the work. The idea hit me so hard, my knees almost buckled. I ran for the door again, already feeling the future closing in, already knowing that wherever I went next, it would follow, patient enough to fold the world smaller until I fit. I made it down the stairs without feeling my feet hit any of them. Cold air slapped my face when I burst outside, and I kept moving, crossing the parking lot, then the street, then another block, like distance might blur me out of its memory. My lungs burned. Every window I passed showed my reflection running beside me, pale and jerky, a man trying to escape something he refused to picture. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station that stayed open all night. Fluorescent lights, humming pumps, a clerk half asleep behind thick glass. Real life. I bent over with my hands on my knees, trying not to throw up, telling myself it couldn't leave the apartment, couldn't step out into the world like a person. But when I finally straightened, there was something pale on the hood of my car across the lot, too small to see clearly, but neat, intentional, waiting. My stomach turned to water. I walked toward it because at some point, fear runs out of places to hide. With each step, I saw the edges sharpen, the creases, the careful balance keeping it upright, even in the wind. It was shaped like a man mid-stride, head angled forward, arms pumping like he was trying very hard to catch someone. My hands felt numb when I picked it up. The paper wasn't warm this time. It was body temperature, like it had borrowed heat from me already. There was weight in the chest, more than before, something solid pulling the figure downward. I knew what it would be even before I tore it open. Not a note, not hair, something personal enough to finish the invitation. The folds peeled back, resisting, then gave way with tiny ripping sounds, and a driver's license slid out, glossy and perfect. My picture smiling up like it had on the day I'd gotten it renewed. I touched my pocket without meaning to. Empty. Around me, the gas station kept existing. Cars coming and going, the clerk scratching lottery tickets, the pump clicking off somewhere behind me. Nobody noticed that the night had leaned closer. I felt it gathering, tall and careful, arranging itself in the blind spot right over my shoulder. It didn't need me to look anymore. It had what it needed, my information, my shape. I understood then that the empty place back on the table had never been waiting for my body. It was waiting for my permission. The paper in my hand started to pull tight, edges lifting, creases forming along my arms, my spine, my neck, mapping me with quiet certainty. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the folding had already begun, and the last thing I heard before the world flattened into white was the soft, satisfied sound of something finally completing itself. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, its screen glowing like a pale warning in the darkness. It was 3:17 a.m., a time when nothing good ever happens, and my chest tightened as I noticed a single, stark message blinking at me. "Check the photos." I rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself it was just a dream, some late-night nonsense, but an uneasy chill had settled over me. Hesitant, I swiped into my gallery and froze. Every photo I had ever taken, stretching back years, had changed. My family, my friends, even the trivial snapshots I had taken alone in my apartment. Behind me, in every frame, there was a man I had never seen before. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but he wasn't subtle. He grinned, wide and unnatural, with a crooked smile that seemed to stretch past the boundaries of his face, and eyes that glinted like black marbles catching light. In one photo, he leaned casually behind me at my mother's birthday party, hand resting on my shoulder as though he had always belonged there. In another, he crouched behind my wife as she opened a wedding gift, smiling so disturbingly close to our son that it made my stomach churn. I tapped the images, hoping they would glitch, vanish, or revert to normal, but they didn't. Instead, in each photo, he seemed to inch closer to me, his presence unnervingly intimate, like the camera itself had been altered to capture him in secret. I stumbled to the living room, shaking, heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. My wife stirred in the kitchen, yawning, but when I showed her the photos, her face went pale. She pointed silently at a picture of our son's first birthday. The man was there too, kneeling behind our boy, one hand brushing the child's shoulder with a grin that seemed alive, as though he were feeding on our happiness. My throat went dry. I tried deleting the photos. I tried restarting my phone. Nothing worked. Panic spiraled inside me as I realized he wasn't just appearing in old memories. He was rewriting them, inserting himself into moments I had lived and remembered vividly, as if he had been there all along, invisible until now. A low, scraping sound came from the hallway. I froze, listening. My apartment was supposed to be silent, and yet it was filled with a subtle, scraping shuffle, like nails dragged across the wooden floor, barely audible, but unmistakably human. I glanced behind me, heart in my throat, and caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the picture frame on the wall. A shadow, impossibly tall and thin, with that same sickening, crooked smile, flickered before vanishing. My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, to shake my wife awake, but no sound came out. I realized, with growing terror, that this was only the beginning. He was here, and he wasn't just in the photos anymore. By the time the sun forced its pale light through the blinds, Exhaustion had twisted my mind into a knot of dread, but the terror didn't stop when I woke. My phone buzzed incessantly, over a dozen new messages flooding the screen from unknown numbers. Each one was the same: "You see me now." A chill ran down my spine, like ice creeping under my skin. At first, I thought it was some twisted hacker prank, until a new file appeared in my gallery, one I hadn't taken. It was a video, grainy and shaky, filmed from somewhere behind me, and the moment I pressed play, my stomach sank. The camera swayed as though held by a trembling hand, capturing me brushing my teeth in the bathroom mirror. And there he was, closer than ever, his black marble eyes boring through my reflection, his grotesque grin stretching unnaturally across his face. Then, impossibly, he leaned forward and whispered my name, not from the video, but from the mirror. I dropped my phone. The sound echoed in the tile-lined bathroom, crisp and wet, like fingernails scraping against bone. I ran, and when I looked back, the mirror was empty, but his presence lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating, curling around my throat like smoke. Desperate, I tried to confide in my wife, thinking the rational world might ground me. But when she saw the video, her scream tore through the apartment, raw and shaking. The framed photographs lining our walls had changed again. In one, the stranger now sat on the edge of our couch, knees bent unnaturally, staring directly at me. In another, he crouched over the crib, closer than the last time, a shadow stretching across our sleeping child's face, grinning as though savoring something I couldn't yet understand. Each frame pulsed with a subtle, unnatural movement, almost imperceptible, like he was breathing, alive, feeding off our fear. I noticed that the newer photos weren't just of the past, they were of the present. Shots of me sleeping, of my wife preparing breakfast, of our son crawling across the floor, all with him lurking, always closer. And then I saw it. In the latest image, he was looking straight into the camera lens, into me, his smile widening in a way that made my teeth ache with cold terror. The messages continued. "Closer, always closer, don't sleep, don't blink." My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the phone. It wasn't just photos anymore. He was in the apartment, in my life, invisible but tangible, watching, waiting for the moment I realized I was never alone. Sleep became a memory I could no longer reach. Every corner of my apartment seemed alive, heavy with a presence I couldn't shake. I tried rationalizing it. Shadows cast wrong by the streetlight, reflections in mirrors. But deep down, I knew better. The stranger wasn't bound by reality. He existed in the spaces between, in corners my eyes couldn't quite focus on, in mirrors just as my reflection moved. That night, as rain streaked the windows and lightning flashed in jagged bursts, I woke to the unmistakable sound of scraping from the living room floorboards. Not the gentle creak of a house settling. This was deliberate and slow, like claws dragging across bare wood. My heart hammered as I crept toward the sound, my bare feet cold against the floor. And then I saw it, a shadow, impossibly tall, thin, standing in the corner. It wasn't cast by me or anything else in the room. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, its grin impossibly wide, stretching past where a human mouth should end. I froze. Even the air seemed to thicken around me, pressing in, smelling faintly of decay and wet soil. Then, a whisper. My name hissed from a direction I couldn't place. My skin crawled, and I realized the shadow was following me, coiling around the room like smoke, creeping closer with each heartbeat. I began documenting everything, desperately trying to anchor myself in reality. But the house itself seemed to betray me. Footprints appeared on the kitchen floor, damp and smudged with mud I had never tracked in. Walls bore scratches, deep, long, as though someone, or something, had clawed at them from the other side, and every frame on the walls had shifted again. The stranger now leaned forward in old family portraits, his eyes glinting, staring directly at me with a hunger that made my blood run cold. I started seeing him everywhere, in the reflection of the toaster, in the darkened glass of picture frames, in the shadows cast by the swaying ceiling fan. It was as if he was learning the rhythm of my life, the pattern of my movements, the exact moment I let my guard down. That night, I almost tripped over him. A figure, just in the edge of my peripheral vision, barely visible, grinning with teeth that seemed sharper than human, stretching impossibly wide as he leaned into me from the darkness. I turned and he vanished, but not really. The feeling remained, heavy, suffocating, and unbearably close. I realized then, with a terror that clawed at my very soul, that this was no longer about photos or videos. He was inside my home, inside my life. And soon I would understand that the mirrors weren't the only things that could show him. The old mirror in the attic had always given me an uneasy feeling, but desperation finally drove me to it. It was a full-length antique, tall and ornate, standing alone in a layer of dust so thick it coated my fingers when I brushed against it. My hands trembled as I propped my phone on a chair, setting it to record, partly to document, partly because I feared I wouldn't survive long enough to explain it otherwise. I stood before it, staring, trying to convince myself that the stranger was just a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion and paranoia. But then the reflection shifted, at first subtle, like ripples in water. And then behind me, unmistakable, he appeared. Not in the reflection alone. He was there in the corner of the attic too, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, with eyes blacker than coal, and a grin that stretched far past human bounds. The air turned icy, making each breath visible, my lungs burning as if inhaling fire and ice at the same time. My phone slipped from my hand, bouncing on the floor with a thud that echoed like a gunshot, and yet I could hear his voice, low, wet, almost tasting the air, whispering my name again, closer, hungrier. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the floor as he stepped closer, and suddenly his hand shot out. Not in the reflection, but through it. It was cold, slick, and I swear I could feel the tiny jagged ridges of his nails digging into my shoulder. Pain exploded through me, a deep, burning ache that made my vision blur. I screamed, but it was swallowed by the attic walls, echoing back as something far worse. Laughter, high-pitched, unhuman, crackling like broken glass. The mirror shattered violently, fragments raining down around me, reflecting hundreds of distorted versions of him, each closer, each grinning wider, each whispering my name over and over. My hands were cut by the shards, blood dripping into the dust like ink bleeding into water, yet I couldn't stop staring. Then, in the largest shard remaining, I saw him lean forward, impossibly close, so that his face filled the glass. His breath fogged the fragment, and I saw teeth blackened and jagged, his eyes voids that seemed to pull me in. And for the first time, I understood. The mirror hadn't trapped him. It had been holding him back. And now that he was free, nothing in this world, not walls, not doors, not even my own life, could keep him away. The morning after the attic incident, I felt hollow, as if a part of me had already been claimed. I knew I couldn't stay in the house another minute, couldn't endure the suffocating presence any longer. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and my phone, determined to leave. But when I unlocked my phone to take one last look at the photos, my blood ran ice cold. The most recent images had updated again. This time, the stranger was no longer lurking behind me. He was in front, directly facing the camera. His black, soulless eyes were locked onto mine, and his grin was wider than the frame could contain, teeth jagged and rotten like shattered porcelain. My wife and son were in the frame too, or rather, what used to be them. Their faces were pale, twisted into expressions of terror, their eyes wide and unseeing, as if he had stolen something from them that I couldn't yet name. The message beneath the photo read simply, "They belong to me now." My stomach turned. Every family memory, every photograph, every reflection in the house had been rewritten. He wasn't just inserting himself into my life. He was erasing mine. I fled to the car, heart hammering, lungs screaming for air, but the terror followed me. Every rearview mirror, every shop window, every reflective surface along the road showed him. Always there, smiling, grinning, moving impossibly closer with every glance. And then I realized the photos weren't just memories, they were maps. Each frame marked his progress. He had been learning me, studying my habits, my family, my routines. And now he had caught up. I pulled off the road, shaking. But when I opened the phone again, there was a single new photo. It was taken from inside the car. The stranger was sitting in the passenger seat. My wife's hand rested on his knee, my son's tiny hand in his other, but their faces were gone, nothing but shadows, hollowed out and lifeless. The caption read, "Next, it's you." My hand slipped from the wheel as nausea and terror collided. I tried to run, to look away, to delete the photo, but it was already too late. He was there, always, had been. And now, as the car keys fell from my hands and my vision blurred, I understood the final, inescapable truth. He didn't just appear in the photos. He didn't just haunt the shadows. He was reality itself. And reality had decided I was next. It was one of those suffocating summer evenings where the air clung to your skin like wet cloth, and the sun, a bloated orange smear, sank too quickly behind the horizon. I was driving home from a late shift, the highway nearly empty, when a sudden flicker in the corner of my eye made me slam on the brakes. Across a field, half hidden in the tall, jagged weeds, a small figure stood, waving frantically. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe just my imagination. But then I heard it, a high-pitched, trembling voice that cut through the oppressive silence. "Help me, please, help me!" My chest tightened. I knew the field. Everyone did. It had been abandoned for over a decade, cordoned off with rusted chain-link fencing, left to swallow broken farm equipment and whatever animals had wandered in to die. Yet there she was, a little girl, dirt-streaked and wild-eyed, staring at me from beyond the fence. Her face was streaked with blood, but not fresh, dried, crusted in patterns that looked disturbingly deliberate, almost like the marks of scratches or nails dragging across her skin. The weeds around her were trampled, bent unnaturally, and the shadows beneath them twisted like slow-moving black smoke, writhing in ways no normal shadow ever should. I stumbled closer, my hand pressed to the fence, calling her name, my voice trembling more than I wanted to admit. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm going to help you." The girl waved harder, her arms jerking unnaturally. And that's when I noticed something that turned my stomach cold. Her shadow didn't move with her. It remained anchored to the ground, a perfect silhouette in the twilight, yet grotesquely elongated and twisted, as if something beneath the soil was tethering it there. And then I heard it. a wet, gurgling laugh coming not from her, but from the field itself, a sound like air being forced through rotting lungs. The weeds near her began to twitch, as though tiny hands were reaching up from the dirt, scraping at the roots and soil, trying to pull her, or maybe me, inside. A foul smell rose like decayed meat and mold, making my stomach churn, but I couldn't turn away. The girl's voice, now frantic, screamed over the grotesque whispers of the field. "Don't leave me! Don't leave me!" I felt an instinctive pull, the kind of compulsion that makes your limbs heavy, your rational thoughts slip away. My hands itched to climb the fence, my mind screaming that this was insane, but something inside me, a mixture of terror and something darker, like the field itself was calling, urged me forward. That's when I noticed the shimmer, a structure in the middle of the weeds, half collapsed, like a barn that had grown out of the dirt itself, warped and skeletal, its edges jagged and glinting in the dying light. And in that moment, I realized, with a slow, sinking horror, that this was not a place for the living, and that the child, whoever or whatever she was, wasn't just trapped. She was waiting for someone to enter. I spent the next hour pacing the perimeter, my flashlight slicing through the thickening gloom, the beam shaking in my hands as if it sensed the dread building around me. Every step felt heavier, my shoes sinking slightly into the soft, damp earth that smelled of rot and iron. The child's voice persisted, soft yet urgent, echoing in fragmented pitches as if more than one voice existed in that small frame. "Help me," it crooned, each syllable slicing into my mind like a jagged blade. My eyes darted to the fence, every post warped, every rusted link groaning in the faint wind, but no gate or weak spot appeared. And yet, I could swear I saw it. Somewhere along the fence, the metal seemed to bend inward slightly, as if breathing, alive. The weeds near it shivered, as if something beneath the soil was stirring, unseen but enormous, pressing upward with intent. My rational mind screamed to leave, but I couldn't. Some instinct, dark and undeniable, rooted me there, pressing me closer, urging me to try again, to find a way in. I tried climbing, grabbing the rusted metal, but it bit into my palms, and even as I pulled, I felt the fence push back, resisting like it had the strength of a living thing. And then I noticed the child more clearly. Her shredded clothes hung from her small frame, like skin stretched over bone. Her knees scraped raw, and the blood on her arms wasn't random. It formed patterns, strange spirals that pulsed faintly in the dim light, almost as if the field itself had tattooed her. And then the whispers began. Not a single voice, but dozens, layered together, impossible to distinguish, rustling from the weeds, rising from the soil, crawling into my ears. Words I couldn't understand, some pleading, some laughing, some harsh like fingernails on wood. My stomach turned. The shadows beneath the weeds shifted, writhing like snakes, stretching taller and darker as I froze, unable to look away. The child's eyes, impossibly wide, seemed to glint with hunger or malice. I couldn't tell which, and the moment I reached toward her, the air thickened, heavy with the stench of decay and something metallic, coppery. And then I saw them, subtle shapes moving just under the surface. Faint ripples where the soil bulged, like bodies pressing from below, waiting, breathing, pulling. I jerked back as a wet, rasping laugh echoed across the field, not from the girl, not from any visible creature, but from the ground itself, deep and hungry. The girl's shadow suddenly split, sliding along the soil independently of her, stretching and curling like black tendrils reaching for me. My heart hammered, every nerve screaming to flee, but the field wasn't done. The chain link fence groaned, the links vibrating as though something massive pressed against it from the inside. Then impossibly, I realized the faint shimmer of the barn-like structure in the center was closer than it had been before, though I hadn't moved. Its jagged edges seemed to twitch, like broken teeth gnashing. And in that instant, the girl screamed, a piercing, unnatural cry that sounded both human and monstrous. "Come in! Come help me!" And I knew, with a clarity that chilled me to the bone, that if I didn't enter, I would never leave. By the time night fully swallowed the horizon, I couldn't resist any longer. I drove home, grabbed a flashlight, and returned, each step toward the field heavier than the last, my stomach churning with a mix of fear and compulsion. But when I arrived, my blood ran cold. The gate, once tightly chained and rusted shut, was wide open. I hadn't touched it. Nobody had. The lock hung from the chain like a forgotten relic, and the metal swayed softly, creaking as though breathing. A cold wind rolled across the field, carrying the scent of wet earth, rotting leaves, and something faintly coppery that reminded me of dried blood. The girl stood beyond the fence, closer now, her small body hunched as if pulled forward by some invisible force. Her dark hair clung to her face in wet strands, and her eyes glimmered in the moonlight, unnaturally bright, reflecting a light that didn't exist. When she smiled, it was the smile of something that had lived far too long in darkness, too wide, too sharp, teeth glinting like shards of glass. I froze, my feet stuck to the ground as the whispers rose from the field, not just around me, but under me, pressing into my ears with soft, wet, guttural insistence. The weeds shifted, brushing against my legs, crawling up like hands trying to drag me in, and the shadows stretching beneath the girl pulsed with a terrible, unnatural rhythm. Come inside," she whispered, her voice both pleading and commanding, echoing in a dozen tones at once, each layered over the other, impossible to untangle. I should have run. I should have turned back, but my body moved forward before my mind could protest. The moment I stepped past the threshold, the air changed. It became viscous, thick, like walking through liquid smoke, carrying a scent of decay that made bile rise in my throat. Every step forward made the ground groan, a low, wet sound, and I realized the soil wasn't just dirt. It was crawling, shifting beneath me, pressing up against my shoes with what felt like the weight of dozens of bodies just below the surface. The girl darted between the weeds with a speed no child could possess, always just ahead of me, her voice calling, echoing, guiding me deeper. And the field wasn't flat anymore. It twisted, the shadows growing into jagged, spindly shapes that reached toward me, stretching impossibly tall, their movements deliberate and hungry. Broken barns and skeletal structures loomed ahead, warped and splintered, their wood groaning as though alive. And as I neared one, I saw cages. Tiny, cramped, metal cages buried half in dirt, their bars glinting faintly. Inside, faint, forms shifted, small bodies huddled in darkness, eerily still, yet somehow aware of me. And then I realized the girl wasn't alone. Her voice rose in a chorus, layered with whispers, laughter, and cries I didn't recognize. And the shadows surged, corralling me, herding me toward the center of the field. My heart pounded, the stench of decay filling my lungs, but I couldn't stop. My feet carried me forward as if drawn by something older, something alive, something that had been waiting for me all along. And as the girl turned, her hollow, bright eyes locked onto mine, and she whispered one last thing before disappearing into the darkness. "It's too late to leave now." I ran blindly, the weeds clawing at my legs like grasping fingers, my flashlight swinging wildly, casting fractured, trembling beams across the field. And that's when I saw them, dozens of children, hidden just beyond the broken barns, pale and grotesque, their faces streaked with dirt and dried blood. They weren't playing. They were waiting, crouched low, their hollow eyes fixed on me, glimmering in the dim light. Their mouths moved, whispering words I couldn't understand, a chorus of desperate pleas and laughter that scraped against my mind like broken glass. The girl I had followed emerged from their midst, smaller than I remembered, her body unnaturally thin, bones visible under her shredded skin. Her eyes glowed with a terrible light, and when she smiled, her teeth were jagged, sharp, glinting like shards of obsidian. The shadows around her weren't shadows at all. They were writhing, crawling entities, stretching from the children, slithering along the weeds like liquid darkness, pulsing with every heartbeat I felt in my chest. The ground beneath me shivered, groaned, and I realized with horror that the soil itself was moving, pressing up against my feet, as if hundreds of unseen hands were trying to drag me down into the field. I stumbled back, my flashlight illuminating cages half buried in the earth. Tiny, cramped metal prisons lined with old rags, each holding a child, or what had once been a child. Some swayed in silence, their heads lolling unnaturally, eyes wide open, yet unseeing. Others shivered violently, whispering for help, their words tangled in the field's chorus of screams and laughter. And then the girl's voice cut through it all, layered, multi-toned, echoing in every direction. "Thank you for coming." I froze, my stomach churning. The field was no longer passive, it was aware. The shadows stretched taller, curling around my legs, trying to herd me toward the cages, toward the children, toward something I couldn't name. The children moved as one, stepping silently, yet with terrifying precision, their gaze unblinking, their whispers crawling under my skin. My instinct screamed to turn and run, but I was trapped in the field's pull, drawn toward the center, where the barn-like structure loomed, jagged and blackened. The girl ran ahead, and the whispers rose into a deafening chorus. "Stay, stay, stay." I realized then, as my flashlight flickered over twisted shapes wriggling in the dirt, that I had never been following a child. I had been following a predator, and the other children were not victims. They were hunters in waiting. And as the shadows surged around me, coiling like snakes, I understood the horrifying truth. The girl had been waiting for me all along, and the field would never let me leave. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle, but the field had grown impossibly large, twisting around me, bending space in ways that made every step feel longer, heavier. The cages were everywhere now, some partially submerged in mud, others perched on spindly wooden stilts that creaked and groaned under their invisible weight. Inside, the children, or what they had become, stirred silently, their hollow eyes following me as I stumbled past. I realized with horror that the ground itself was alive. It pulsed, subtly but insistently, with a heartbeat that wasn't mine, pushing me toward the center. The girl appeared suddenly in front of me, impossibly close, though I hadn't seen her move. Her face was now a mask of twisted joy and hunger, her teeth jagged, wet, glistening in the dim moonlight. Her shadow stretched across the field like a blackened river, splitting into multiple forms that writhed over the cages, brushing against the trapped children as if feeding off their terror. The whispers grew louder, becoming words I could almost understand. "You belong here. Stay, stay." My stomach churned, bile rising, as the smell of rot, iron, and something worse, something like the essence of fear itself, filled the air. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, yet my feet refused to obey. The field had me, and the girl's layered, echoing voice carried me forward like a tide of inevitability. I fell to my knees at the base of the central barn-like structure, and that's when I saw it. Shapes pressed against the walls from the inside. Pale, twisted, small bodies that shivered and writhed, each one staring at me with hollow eyes, silently pleading. The girl's voice rose above the chorus, layered in dozens of tones, some crying, some laughing, some screaming in unearthly anguish. Stay, play with us, forever. And then the shadows surged, rising from the weeds, the cages, the ground itself, curling around my legs, crawling up my arms, cold and wet, squeezing with impossible strength. I screamed, clawed at the grasping black tendrils, but it was no use. The field was alive, sentient, and hungry. The little girl stepped closer, her smile stretching impossibly wide, and whispered, "It's too late. You can't leave. You're one of us now." My vision blurred as the shadows pulled me toward the cages, toward the waiting children, toward the endless whispers. And the barn-like structure loomed above, jagged edges casting impossibly long shadows across my face. My body hit the dirt, sinking, and I felt the field swallowing me, its heartbeat sinking with mine, dragging me into the soil where the other children had waited for years, perhaps decades. Then darkness claimed me completely. When I awoke, I was outside the fence, on the cracked, overgrown path where I had first seen her. The gate was chained, rusted, immobile, as if nothing had ever happened. And across the field, a small, terrified child waved at me. Her voice, high and urgent, carried across the empty night. "Help me, please, help me." My legs moved before my mind could think, heart hammering in sheer terror. And I knew with bone-deep certainty that I could never leave, that the field never lets go, and that one day someone else would see her, and the cycle would begin again.